The book describes how Trump considered sending Americans sick with COVID aboard cruise ships to Guantanamo Bay. His hope that his own former national security advisor, John Bolton, will be taken out by COVID in a, quote, darkly serious tone, according to the book. And the scramble to save Trump's own life when he became seriously ill with COVID. He was treated with a, quote, dizzying array of drugs, some experimental, that needed special FDA approval. Most of them unavailable to the general public. His severe illness caught the White House so unprepared, Vice President Mike Pence, it seems, wasn't even briefed on a plan to swear him in if Trump became incapacitated. All of it gives new light to a chaotic year marked by the Trump administration's ineptitude and recklessness when it came to fighting COVID-19. Here with me now is Washington Post health policy reporter Yasmin Abutaleb, co-author of Nightmare Scenario: Inside the Trump Administration's Response to the Pandemic That Changed History. Yasmin, thanks so much for coming on the show. Congratulations on the book. Depressing though it is, some of the contents. You describe in your book how people like CDC Director Robert Redfield and other aides hoped the president's illness might be a turning point in his COVID response. Of course, we know it wasn't. We had that infamous drive-by at Walter Reed, the balcony moment on his return home to the White House. My question to you is, you interviewed a lot of people for this book. Why did they think he'd be a changed man after what we'd seen of him in the previous 4 years? What's wrong with these people?
It's a great question. I think they thought he got sick. He saw up front how serious this virus was, how serious the disease was from the virus. His life was on the line for a period of time. His doctors were fearing that they were going to have to put him on a ventilator, which is why they eventually moved him to Walter Reed. And they thought, the way it's sort of written that you showed on the screen, if this isn't the inflection point, then what is going to be? And if you remember, the First Lady had also gotten coronavirus that weekend, as had their son Barron. But the president did get access to what was then an experimental medication and had a pretty rapid turnaround. And he came back defiant, saying, don't let it ruin your life, don't let it scare you. And they were all pretty crestfallen by that, because he didn't seem to recognize that he had access to drugs and medical care that pretty much no other person could get access to.
Yeah, I remember him coming back to the White House and saying, don't let it take over your life. Well, you know, the rest of us don't have what he has. Some of the things you describe are pretty outrageous. The idea of sending American citizens to a prison camp in Cuba, wishing John Bolton would die of COVID. And by the time he left office, of course, over 400,000 Americans were dead from COVID. Did you get the sense from the people you spoke with that they want Trump, or anyone in the administration, to be held accountable for the botched response? Because I feel like your book is just another addition to the case for prosecuting Trump over COVID-19, or at least have some kind of formal accountability for him.
There were definitely people who were warning about what needed to be done, that the president needed to have a stronger message on masks. But I think a lot of the book documents this culture of fear and this really toxic culture of bullying and domineering personalities that made it very difficult to unite and carry out a response. And so much of the day would be sucked up by worrying about the president's mood and was he in the mood to hear something. So, I mean, to answer your question, I don't think anyone really said you need to own this, you need to take responsibility for it, especially after March and April when it was pretty clear he was focused on reopening. He wanted to turn his attention to the election. I think some people tried to put their heads down and do what they could do, but we did not get the sense, Damian and I, in talking to all these people, that someone tried to sit him down and say, okay, it's time for you to take responsibility. There was a lot of tiptoeing around his moods and his outbursts.
Yes, and there was, of course, the idea that he was a Republican president, getting judges confirmed and tax cuts. Hey, what's a few 100,000 dead between that? You interviewed about 180 people for this book. Is there anything about the chaos of the Trump COVID response that surprised you most in your reporting?
You know, Damian and I have talked about this, and I think one of the big takeaways is there were so many opportunities to turn the response around that we didn't always know about in real time, whether they were discussions or proposals that came to the White House that really could have changed the course of response and saved lives. One thing that's important to make clear is this was going to be difficult no matter who was president. Unfortunately, Americans were going to die. This is just an incredibly difficult virus to fight, and there were systemic issues that predated the Trump administration. But we focused on the political decisions that exacerbated a lot of the already enormous challenges the U.S. was facing. And we document a number of times that I have not been reported before where the response could have dramatically changed. A couple of instances regarding masks, of course, the president's return from Walter Reed and the message he could have sent to the public. And there were all these opportunities where decisions weren't made or the wrong decision was made and they just kind of disappeared.
Yes, and there wasn't enough pushback, certainly not publicly. One figure on the COVID task force that the public quickly turned on was Dr. Deborah Birx. The book describes her steadfast allegiance to a military chain of command that kept her from challenging Trump during key moments. I mean, that allegiance really backfired on her, didn't it? Because she is now, among liberals at least, a hate figure in a way that Dr. Fauci's dodged being.
It did hurt her. She, was in the Army, and that was a lot of her upbringing. So her and Dr. Redfield, the CDC director at the time, did have this kind of religious adherence to the chain of command. But I think people thought she took that too far by some of the public comments she made about the president, about his attentiveness to data and to details that people knew wasn't true just based on what he was saying in public. What we did document was that she was doing a lot of work behind the scenes. For a while, she was kind of making this calculation, and it did pay off. It was in large part because of her work and gathering data and making the case to the president that she got him to extend the shutdown for another 30 days. And she made the case with Dr. Fauci, but she really gathered the data from European counterparts and put projections together that really kind of scared him. But after that, she lost a lot of her influence. She turned her attention to going to states and trying to convince local leaders to do the right thing. But her public image had been so tarnished by some of the interviews she did. And then, of course, the Bleach press conference where people felt like she should have spoken up.
The Bleach.
So,
I'll never forget that scene where, none of us will forget Donald Trump's disinfectant remarks, but I'll never forget her sitting by the wall on that chair as he said it to her, and later on coming on the media and pretending, anyways. It's all a tragedy. I'm glad you were able to document it for posterity, for historians, and hopefully for some kind of accountability, because it annoys me that there hasn't been any. The book is Nightmare Scenario: Inside the Trump Administration's Response to the Pandemic That Changed History. It's available now. Yasmin Abutaleb, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. Appreciate it. Hi, I'm Mehdi Hasan. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more of the Mehdi Hasan Show by clicking on any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thank you for watching.